Oh, ahoy there, mates. We're just playing Mummies and Skeletons. It's this VCR board game. I got it at a flea market on Thrift Store Island. But, it's pretty complicated. And, I think little creep here is cheating.
Cheating? How can I be cheating if I don't know how to play?
Yeah, that's true. The instructions are very vague. Move your mummy centurion 3 spots west.
What's a mummy centurion and west of what?
I have no idea. It's like they were drunk when they came up with this. You could always try just watching the videotape. Idiot! Yeah, that's true. That might actually help.
Of course! That's the point of the whole game! We are pretty stupid.
Welcome to Mummies and Skeletons, the board game that proves there's an afterlife and it's total warfare.
Ooh, how intriguing!
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic. Of course it's dramatic!
Huh, that's weird.
You should talk. Player 1, move your mummy centurion 3 spots west. Well, that's the thing. I don't know what that is. Move your mummy centurion 3 spots west. Look, you will pay for defying me. I don't understand how to play. Move your mummy centurion 3 spots west. Look, I'll level with you. I don't know how to play either. I'm just trying to get through college with this gig. College. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous? You're the one talking to a VHS tape. No, I mean, college really isn't all it's cracked up to be. You'd probably have more success at a trade school or a vocational school. Really?
Yeah, my cousin Timothy makes a very lucrative living as a welder.
Yeah. What's your major? Underwater basket weaving. Well, there's your problem right there. I should say, dump the school and get into welding. That's where the big bucks are. Perhaps I should try that out. What do you suggest? Enough with the guidance counseling. Let's see if we can play this game.
Yes.
What do you got? Yes. Let me take a look here. Let's see. Well, mates, looks like this could take a while. Why don't you enjoy the new episode while we try to figure out how to play this damn game?
Who would have thought that something that only costs $2 would give us so much trouble?
What's a mummy centurion? Enjoy the show, and we'll talk to you soon. Yar!
Yar!
Yar! Playing some board games
on a rainy day.
Playing some board games.
They are fun to play.
Playing some board games.
Life in Monopoly.
Playing some board games.
And maybe sorry.
Playing some board games.
Board games.
Yes, the board game, the wherewithal standard in home entertainment. And it has been for years, decades, centuries, and beyond. Yeah, apparently the board game has been around for an insanely long time. So when you think of ancient Egypt, what do you think of? Mummies? Pyramids? Pharaohs? Stargate? Would board games be on that list? Well, guess what? The earliest known board game is from ancient Egypt, and it's called Senet, and it dates back to 3300 BC. Yes, all the way back from when calendars didn't make any sense. In fact, this game is so old that no one really knows how to play it anymore. Yes, so it seems that through the ages, board games have been very popular, and that popularity would shoot through the roof in 1903 with the invention of Monopoly. It was invented by Elizabeth Maggie, or is it Maggie? I'm not sure, but that's her. And the Monopoly that we know today is actually derived from her original concept, the Landlord's Game, which pretty much has the same premise as Monopoly. So the Landlord's Game morphed into Monopoly and has been ending friendships and destroying families ever since. Board games in general grew to be a solid foundation, and not even the invention of video games could shake it. In fact, there's some board games based on video games and some video games based on board games.
I have no idea what's going on.
Yes, it's a weird concept, but fun all the same. There are many board games out there, seemingly one for everything. I mean, there's a board game for the Police Academy cartoon show. Yeah, board games are such a hot ticket that it's a perfect way to market something, and plenty have done just that. Especially Monopoly, because if something's popular, there's going to be a version of Monopoly based on it. And a lot of times it doesn't make any sense. Like, what the hell is Transformers Monopoly about? So anyways, the board game has continued to evolve over the years and has gained many different kinds of formats. And the invention of home video would eventually lead to another kind of board game format, which would be the legendary VCR board game, which is a board game that has the inclusion and total involvement of a video cassette. And this video cassette would be crucial to playing the game, as it would give you instructions and prompt you as to what to do next, making it fully interactive. Now, I know what you're asking, how is a pre-recorded tape interactive? And if you're not asking yourself that, well, you should be, because it's a pretty damn good question. In fact, to me, these things are loaded with questions. How do they work? I mean, there can't be any replay value on them. Once you play it, what's next? You've already seen it, right? Is that how it works? How do these things work? Well, each one of the VCR board games are played a bit differently than the others. They each have their own unique styles and gimmicks, but basically the premise of all of them is the same. You play the game, then you follow cues that tell you to start the tape. Then the tape tells you to do something, then you pause the tape, then continue to play the game, then you get another cue to start the tape again, and so on and so on and so on. Basically, it's a bunch of work. Though it is a pretty unique and fun idea, but still, you might as well just play a normal board game. Unless that board game is Mousetrap, because that's a whole lot of work for a whole bunch of nothing. I mean, it's not even a board game. It's more like a science fair project that you don't get credit for. You need a damn engineering degree just to set the thing up. You might as well spend your Sunday afternoon building a gazebo. But anyways, so who was the first one to come up with the VCR board game? Well, it would be one of the kings of board games, Parker Brothers. In 1985, they turned the classic board game Clue into an immersive VCR experience.
An immersive VCR experience.
Wow. All right, and this would seem to be the perfect game to fit into the VCR board game format. You would play the game as you normally would, except a murder mystery was unfolding around you on your VCR. It was a cool new way to play. Yes, it was new, it was different, it was unique, and it was very interesting, and soon other companies followed suit. And the fact that VHS could now be incorporated into board games was very intriguing. Yes, it would seem that it was a brave new world for board games, and surely this would get the buyer's attention, or at least you would think so. So yes, this was a unique and interesting way to play board games, but was it successful? Yeah, we have the benefit of hindsight now and probably scoff at this idea, but really at the time, it was seemingly taking off. But was it just a flash in the pan, something bright and shiny to look at? How long would these things conquer the board game world? Or did they even really do that? And how many of these things were there? Well, more than you think. And today, we're going to find answers to these questions and explore the realm of VCR board games. Because it's today's episode,
Venturing into VCR board games!
So Clue would seem to be the perfect game to fit into this bold new format of board game. Sure, I mean, the original game plays out like a movie anyway, so you might as well have a neat little videotape to go with it. And not to mention that Clue is the only board game to have a movie based on it, which was released in theaters December 13th, 1985. And it's a strange concept to have a movie based on a board game, but this just works. And Clue is really the only board game that a movie would work for. I mean, can you really think of any other board games? A Monopoly movie? Maybe. But that would be really stupid. Clue the movie was not a critical success, and it didn't do well at the box office either. But that's okay, because this movie has since gained cult acclaim, and it is really neat to see Tim Curry and Christopher Lloyd in the same movie. And do you know what is a really underrated aspect about this movie? What? Well, in keeping with tradition of the game, this movie actually had 3 different endings. When this was in theaters, you could see a different ending depending on which region of the country you were in. You know, like if somebody saw it in New York, they would see a different ending than someone who saw it in Denver. You know what I mean? I don't know, I just think that's a really clever idea, and nobody ever talks about this. It is a seemingly forgotten aspect of the world's only board game movie. When it was released on VHS in 1986 by Paramount Home Video, they included all 3 endings, which completely erased the magic of the original theatrical release, and nobody talked about the different ending thing anymore. It would have been a lot of fun if instead of including all 3 endings, they would put a different ending on each one of the videotapes and distribute them at random so you never knew which one you were going to get. Oh, come on, that would be a shit ton of fun. It would be the perfect mystery for a murder mystery movie that was based on a murder mystery board game. And since you wouldn't know which one you were going to get, it would certainly make trying to find this VHS for your VHS collection a lot more interesting than it actually is. Because even though it was released only once on VHS, this is not hard to find today, and it goes for around $5 to $10. So how about the VCR board game, which is actually what I'm supposed to be talking about right now? So anyways, how much is that going for nowadays? The answer might shock you. No, it won't. The average price seems to be around $17. Now, adjusted for inflation, I'm guessing that's pretty much the same price it cost when it was new. Certainly not as expensive as you think it would be going for today, so it's pretty reasonable. I mean, that's assuming all the pieces are with it and it's complete. And if you're a board game collector, then you know that that's a very hard thing to come across. Anyways, Clue the VCR mystery game was extremely popular. It was flying off the shelves. It was a perfect design of combining a favorite board game with new technology. And it all comes down to the videotape itself. It was very well done. It had actual actors portraying the roles of the classic characters. And you combine that with the aspect of the game itself, and you have a recipe for success. The videotape was so popular that in 1986, it reached number 30 on Billboard's top video cassette chart, which I didn't even know was an actual thing, but it is, and it's quite the accolade. Now, I know what you're saying. Gee, number 30, that's not really good. Yeah, well, keep in mind that this video cassette is from a board game. It's not an actual movie. It's not for rental. It's for a board game. It was made with no expectation or intention of being on any kind of chart. It was made to sell board games and make for a totally immersive VCR experience.
A totally immersive VCR experience! VCR experience!
Huh. So, that's going to be happening the whole episode, or what? Okay. So, Clue, the VCR mystery game, was a tremendous success and would prove that VHS had a place with board games. And this would even be treated to a sequel in 1988 with Clue 2, Murder in Disguise. And this was certainly a little bit more cartoony and outlandish. I mean, look at that. What the heck? But still, it was a big hit. Now, upon seeing the success of the then-new VCR board game, Milton Bradley was not about to be outdone by their rival Parker Brothers. And they were rivals. Though we forget about this nowadays, these two companies were locked in total warfare for domination of the board game. Though it was pretty much low-key, this rivalry was akin to the Cola Wars, the battle between WCW and WWF, the great format wars between VHS and Beta, Marvel Comics versus DC Comics. That reminds me, it's always bothered me that people call it DC Comics, and even the company itself calls it DC Comics. And why does it bother me? Well, I'm glad you asked. DC stands for Detective Comics, so calling it DC Comics means you're saying Detective Comics comics. It's the same thing as saying ATM machine. ATM stands for automatic teller machine. So when you say ATM machine, what you're really saying is automatic teller machine. So anyways, we would go on to find out that within these great rivalries, WCW would eventually implode on itself and WWF would buy it. And we know now that VHS would eventually go on to be successful and triumphant over Betamax, only to lose out to DVD later down the road. DC and Marvel Comics will be forever at odds and continue to rip each other off until the end of time, and the Cola Wars are still going on. Hell, Coke and Pepsi can't even be sold in the same restaurant together. So how about the great Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers rivalry? Well, it would seem that nobody really gives a shit anymore, including the companies themselves. So anyways, yes, I'm way off topic here, but Milton Bradley would answer back in 1986 with their own VCR board game. And it was Candyland? Yeah, they turned their classic board game Candyland into an immersive VCR experience. An immersive VCR? Oh, just forget it. And later on that same year, they would give the same treatment to their other classic kids board game, Chutes and Ladders. And then they would also team up with Disney and produce not one, but two Disney Trivia VCR board games. And so it was that Milton Bradley's first venture into the VCR board game world was more geared towards kids. Certainly a different approach than what Parker Brothers took, but hey, kids could also play Clue, as long as you were okay with your kids playing a game about murder. So yes, the VCR board game was certainly proving to be a top contender for home entertainment. And the list certainly would not stop with these few examples. There would be many more to come. Many more interesting ones, and some not so much. So let's dive a little deeper into the world of the VCR board game when we come back. Stay right there, mateys. Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship. We'll be right back. Hey there, folks, it's me, Little Vino. Did you fuck your car up again? Maybe it's overheating because you never flushed your radiator. Did you even know you're supposed to do that? Or maybe your transmission's fucked up because you didn't know your car was a stick shift and you drove with it in first gear for 10 goddamn miles. Or maybe you need some body work done because you fucked up your rear end backing out of a parking spot by smashing into some other car because you couldn't see because of all the goddamn stickers on your rear window. Bunch of stickers that say Save the Whales and all these avant-garde speed metal bands that nobody's heard of. Well, it's too bad you don't put as much effort into driving as you do letting the world know how unique and different you are. Well, whatever your stupid ass problem is, your car's fucked up and I'm sure it's your fault. But I ain't here to judge. I'm just here to fix your car and serve you a nice cheesesteak while you wait. So come on down to Little Vino's Automotive Repair and Cheesesteak Emporium. We do all kinds of automotive repair and got lots of cheesesteaks. There's no job too small and no moron too stupid. We got the best cheesesteaks in the country in several locations to serve you better. So come on down, let me fix your fucked up car and eat a nice cheesesteak. Just because you're a fucking moron doesn't mean your taste buds are. Little Vino's Automotive Repair
And Cheesesteak Emporium.
It's the PWF Cinco de Mayhem! Only on pay-per-view Sunday, May 5th. Don't miss any of the action as Big Dump Ferguson defends his PWF World Championship title against Ham Salad O'Brien. And scores will be settled as COBRA WANG takes on Mr. Fix-It. Then it'll be total tag team turbulence as the Caveman Commandos take on the Legion of Christmas Sweaters. Then the action continues as Anemic Nicodemus takes on Meat Sauce Murphy. Don't miss Tetanus Gonzalez taking on Hepatitis HEDGES in a rusty swing set match. That doesn't sound safe at all. And warfare awaits as Jeff the Chef takes on the angry insurance adjuster. Then it'll be the watermelon felon taking on Simon Sweatpants in a build your own fajita match. I don't even know what that is. And don't miss the fan requested match as an astronaut takes on a horse wearing clothes. Havoc, bedlam, mayhem. But not just any mayhem. It's the PWF Cinco de Mayhem. Only on pay-per-view Sunday, May 5th. Call your local cable provider today. And act fast, because the first 20 callers win the PWF VCR board game. It's not just any mayhem, it's the PWF Cinco de Mayhem.
We now return to Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship. Welcome back, mates. We're still trying to figure out how to play this damn game, but it just seems to get more and more confusing. Little creep, if you had to guess, would you say that this was a mummy centurion?
I mean, I guess. What does a mummy centurion even look like?
How about this?
No, that's just a little Optimus Prime.
What the... This game is pretty damn hard to play, so we don't have any luck whatsoever. Place your skeleton barricade 4 spots northeast. Why would you make a board game this difficult? You know what? Forget it. I'm out of here.
Wow, I really wasn't expecting that.
Well, this game's pretty interactive.
Yeah, it's a totally immersive VCR experience. Huh. What do you want to do now?
I don't know. But anyways, let's get back to the adventure. So, yo ho ho, enjoy the show. Yar. So, as the Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers rivalry raged on, there was another dog in the fight, Pressman Toys, an underrated board game company that has been a mainstay in the board game section of every store in every country since 1922. They are forgotten about and shrugged off for seemingly no reason. This is surprising considering their board games are in every closet of every beach house or quaint little mountain cabin as rainy day fodder. And perhaps you yourself have at least one of their games in your board game hoard. They are forgotten and forsaken, yet everyone has heard of them, whether they know it or not. This company is primarily responsible for bringing classic old world games into every home, like chess, checkers, chess and checkers, backgammon, stuff like that. And they're also the masterminds behind, Mastermind, and stuff like Topple and that neat little magnetic fishing game. Even if you don't know their name, you know Pressman's games, and they were certainly a board game powerhouse, a juggernaut, if you will. And upon seeing the popularity of the new VCR board games, Pressman Toys decided to jump in head first, and in 1986 released their first VCR board game, which was Doorways to Adventure! Oh boy, how exciting. With a name like that, this has no other choice but to be really good. Not exactly. Yeah, this isn't exactly what you'd think it would be. The videotape contains a bunch of stock footage from old adventure movies that are pretty much public domain. And it's more of a card game than it is a board game. And the objective of the game is not what you think it would be either. You see, the point of the game is to bid on certain artifacts that show up in certain scenes of the videotape. And the player who has the most successful bids by the end of the videotape is the winner. So it's an adventure game that has you bid on stuff? That's kind of weird. That's more like an auctioneering game, I guess. Hell, it should be called Doorways to Auctioneering! I mean, you kind of feel bad for this game because I think Pressman was actually really trying to make something interesting, but it just didn't work out all that well. But if you wanted to find out for yourself, you can find one of these brand new and sealed for $16. Wow, it's selling for cheaper than when it first came out. Okay, I'm gonna cut Pressman some slack here. It was a new thing. They weren't really sure what they were doing, but they went ahead with it anyway. They tried, it just didn't work. Doorways to Adventure was their first attempt at the VCR board game, and it wasn't very good, but surely their second attempt at the VCR board game would be awesome, right? Well, we would find out with Doorways to Horror! which was also released in 1986, and like Doorways to Adventure, sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. Because really, if you were to look up disappointment in the dictionary, you would find a picture of this game. This, too, acts primarily as a card game as opposed to a board game. The video cassette is seemingly pointless, as it mainly and mostly acts only as a timer, and at times the players moves as they once again bid on stuff. Only this time, instead of artifacts, you're bidding on monsters. What is going on with Pressman and bidding? I don't really understand. I would totally get it if the game was about auctioning off livestock, but it's not. It's Doorways to Horror. It's supposed to be about monsters. Why is there bidding involved? And as you play this game, you sort of get the feeling that Pressman has no idea what they're doing. In fact, their first attempt at the VCR board game, which wasn't all that good, is better than this one. But the packaging looks pretty cool. However, it looks better on the store shelf, where it should have stayed. So, Pressman's first two contributions to the VCR board game world weren't all that good, but all would not be lost for Pressman Toys, as 1986 would also see them release the Three Stooges VCR game, and this was a hit, proving that you really can't go wrong with the Three Stooges, unless, of course, it's the stuff with Joe. But other than that, if you put the Three Stooges in your product, you're gonna have some success. Hell, even the Nintendo game, as shitty as it is still pretty damn entertaining, and the Three Stooges VCR game is a shit ton of fun. Though, once again, it is more of a card game than it is a board game, but the premise is pretty solid. Basically, the players get cards, and you watch the tape, and every time one of the words that corresponds with one of your cards shows up on screen, you throw it down. The object is to have the least amount of cards at the end of the tape. The player with the lowest score wins. It's a pretty fun concept. The tape has a shitload of Three Stooges footage, and guess what? There's no bidding. And I know I've been giving Pressman Toys a pretty hard time about the whole bidding thing. It's just pretty odd to me, and I suppose it must be pretty hard to come up with a concept for a VCR board game. And I guess the whole bidding thing is a neat way to involve the videotape, therefore justifying the entire concept of the VCR board game, because you do gotta watch the videotape or else none of it means anything. So yeah, the whole bidding aspect is a good idea to an extent, and it is a rather interesting concept. It just didn't hold water, nor did it work very well. But just because something didn't work doesn't mean it wasn't a good idea. So Pressman Toys ended up releasing a trilogy of VCR board games in 1986. However, 1986 would see yet another company get involved in the interactive VCR games, and that company was called Interactive VCR Games. Boy, they really could have sprung for a more thrilling name. But it is pretty straightforward, and surely a company with a name like that would know all about VCR games. I mean, I guess, as long as board games based on sports is your thing, because their main contributions to the VCR board game world were all about sports. And in 1986 and 87, they would release NBA basketball, NFL quarterback football, and NHL hockey. And the videotapes for each of these games included live footage from actual sporting events that coincided with the game you were playing. And each of these games had their own little gimmick, which was kind of neat, and you would watch the videotape to give you cues as to what to do next. But all in all, you might as well just watch sports, because that's essentially what you were doing, except there was a bunch of work involved. Now, the sports-themed board game has always been a strange thing to me, and I think it's very ironic that you take something that requires its participants to be very physically active and do it in the most sedimentary way possible, as you represent the sport the board game is based on by getting in the game. You too can be part of the action by sitting on your ass. Yeah, these sports board games are just very ironic and odd things. And these sports VCR board games by Interactive VCR Games Incorporated are no different. Except with these, you watch videotapes of people playing actual sports. So perhaps you're like me and think sports board games don't make any sense, and wonder what could make less sense. Well, how about professional wrestling board games? To which there have been a few, and there was even one for the Von Erichs. That's pretty specific. But as odd of a concept it may seem to have a pro wrestling board game, it it kind of works. So that being the case, there surely must have been a VCR board game about pro wrestling. Surely there must have, and surely there was. In 1987, the world was introduced to the WWF VCR WrestleMania game! And this was a total hit, as lots of people have fond memories of this one, mainly because it was a lot of fun to play and it worked very well. It had an interesting concept where you would draw cards and try to push your opponent off the game board, with the game board being the wrestling ring, and your objective was to try to make it around the board 2 times. As the game was set up as a best 2 out of 3 falls match, the first 1 to 2 wins. And every now and again, you would be prompted to watch portions of the videotape, which contained tons and tons of WWF footage that contained actual matches from actual events featuring actual WWF superstars.
How many times are you gonna say actual?
This board game was a sports board game that just worked very well. It was made by Acclaim. You may know them best from their video games, as they went on to be a very prominent video game producer throughout the 1990s. Probably best known for their Mortal Kombat home console conversions. But before all that, they released this. And they would also go on to release the WrestleMania video game for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is well known as being one of the worst wrestling video games of all time. Yeah, that video game is a total piece of shit, but this VCR board game sure as hell isn't. And though it is the most famous and widely known pro wrestling VCR board game, it's not the only one. In 1986, the AWA released their own VCR board game. You know, the AWA. The wrestling promotion where Vince McMahon pretty much got all of his wrestlers from, only to later on buy that company outright. Well, anyways, this was released by Remco, and you would play this game by watching the videotape, which was loaded with AWA footage, and you would draw cards that featured wrestling maneuvers on them in the hopes of matching that wrestling maneuver with whatever wrestling maneuver was being featured on the videotape. Stop saying maneuver! And you would be prompted to draw cards from cues on the videotape, and each time you matched one, you advanced on the board. So this is pretty damn neat, and I didn't even know this existed. And it's hard to believe this was a thing, considering the AWA didn't really have all that much merchandise. So this VCR board game was certainly overshadowed by the WWF's WrestleMania VCR game, and this certainly is a forgotten wrestling relic. And so as the 1990s rolled in and the 20th century was slowly approaching its autumn, the VCR board game, which had been budding throughout the 1980s, had started to come into full bloom, and the games were starting to get more and more clever. Oh, somebody pulled the clever lever! And the game that would send the popularity of the VCR board game into the stratosphere was
Nightmare!
This was released in 1991, and not only is it the perfect example of a horror game, but also the perfect example of a VCR board game. Because really, when people think of VCR board games, they more than likely will think of this one first. I mean, come on, this has to be the most popular VCR board game. I mean, hell, it stands out by itself in its own category. And this game has a very expansive and involved story for a board game. The game takes place in what is known as the other side. And the players each take on the role of one of 5 characters: a werewolf, a vampire, a witch, a mummy, and a zombie. There really is more to it. I'm just giving a synopsis. Each of these characters has their own backstory. And this cadre of characters make up a group that is known as the Harbingers. And this group also includes the Gatekeeper, your host for this lovely little game. And the Gatekeeper, of course, is featured on the videotape, which primarily acts as a timer. And the Gatekeeper pretty much spends his time insulting you and prompting you into what to do next. The point of the game is to collect keys and make it to the center of the board, which is referred to as
the Nightmare Circle.
All the while trying to accomplish this before the tape ends, which is 60 minutes. And if you do this, you escape the other side. And if you do not, the Gatekeeper wins. It's a very well done game, well written, well conceived, and the whole concept is fascinating. And this game is the first installment of the Atmosphere series, which would continue to grow throughout the early 90s, and Nightmare would have a few sequels. There was Nightmare 2 from 1992, Nightmare 3 from 1993, and Nightmare 4, I bet you can't guess what year that's from. Yep, 94. And there was a fifth Nightmare that was set to be released in 95, but they dumped it because of declining sales. So I guess the charm of this game eventually wore off. But you know what? If they would have included the Three Stooges, Nightmare 5 would have been made. But enough about nightmares and pro wrestling. It's time to party with the Wayne's World VCR board game, which was released by Mattel in 1992. And this, of course, is based on the movie Wayne's World, which was released in theaters February 14th of that same year. In this game, you move around the board by use of a spinner, which tells you how many spaces to move, collecting what is known as party pieces, and randomly answering or asking questions from the pop quiz cards. As you watch the videotape of Wayne and Garth entertaining you and prompting you as to what to do next. In short, this is a lot of fun and very well done, which is surprising considering that Mattel did not make a lot of board games. And though this game is a lot of fun, you could say it's pretty forgotten about nowadays, which I think is because Wayne's World itself didn't get a lot of merchandise. Well, there was that absolutely horrible Super Nintendo game, but we won't talk about that. And then there's Party Mania. Well, gee, I guess this game has its place, but, yeah, I'm gonna move on. And the sci-fi world would not be excluded from the VCR board game, as 1993 would see the release of Star Trek The Next Generation VCR board game, A Klingon Challenge. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Okay, well, Star Trek The Next Gen. Ba 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 ba. Stop it! And this was made by Milton Bradley, and this would be the first VCR board game they had made since their totally immersive VCR experience of Chutes and Ladders. The story goes that the Enterprise, whilst being docked for repairs, has been hijacked by a renegade Klingon, and the objective is to make it through the ship and regain control within the 60-minute time limit of the tape's runtime. And as the tape plays, the story unfolds with plot points and action and cues on what to do next. And if you haven't guessed by now, the videotapes in these board games are primarily used as timers, because really, what else are they going to be used for? And in this game, if nobody wins within the 60-minute time limits, everyone loses. But I guess that's pretty obvious. And there was a sequel planned for this, but they lost the licensing rights. And as always, not to be outdone by Milton Bradley, Parker Brothers would answer back with their own VCR board game based on a major science fiction property. And in 1996, they released Star Wars, the interactive video board game. And the videotape for this actually features David Prowse reprising his role as Darth Vader, and James Earl Jones once again providing Darth Vader's iconic voice. Though in this, James Earl Jones's voice is a little subdued and soft-spoken, making it seem like Darth Vader had a bunch of Robitussin. Anyways, the objective of this game is to stop the Empire's new Death Star from destroying a bunch of shit, all while Darth Vader is pursuing you. And the videotape provides a bunch of action and plot points and Darth Vader talking shit on you the whole time. And this videotape, as you may have already guessed, acts as a timer. Let me guess, it's 60 minutes long, right? Very good. Yes, it's 60 minutes long. And if you don't win the game by the end of the tape, you lose. Yeah, I'm kind of picking up a theme here. It seems that all of these VCR board games, though they may have different stories, all have the same premise. With the exception of a very few, it seems that if you don't win the game by the end of the tape, you lose. Which is fine. I mean, what else are you supposed to do with a videotape that's involved with a board game? I mean, it's pre-recorded, so its interaction can only go so far. And when they say it's an interactive game, it's a bit of a misconception. But I get it. It's all about marketing, and it does make it sound way cooler than it really is. But all in all, the VCR board game was a very interesting concept and quite a novel way to capture the new technology of the VHS. And of course, by proxy, the concept is very dated nowadays and totally obsolete, but it was still a great idea back then. Now, you might ask, were there any Betamax board games? Go ahead. Yes, but the numbers were very few, and a lot of companies didn't even want to bother with the transfer. Because I'm guessing even back then, they could see that Betamax was not going to win the format wars. The VCR board game was more popular and successful than people think it was. There were tons of these made, roughly about 70 of them, all the way up to the twilight of the early 2000s, towards the end of the VHS empire. Hell, they even made one for California games. Now, how the shit do you play that? Yeah, they made a VCR board game based on a shitty Nintendo game that's based on a less shitty computer game. So yeah, the VCR board game realm is pretty wide indeed, and I only talked about the best examples of these games, and to which there are way more terrible examples. The VCR board game at one time was a very important part of the VHS landscape, and is the perfect testimonial of its place in time, and will be forever placed in the high halls of nostalgia. So that brings us to the end of our little adventure today. I hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to hit subscribe, and take care out there, and I'll see you next time, only on Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship.